Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another UDI Okanagan webinar. I see that we still have a number of participants coming in, so we'll just wait just a few moments. In the meantime, again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is another opportunity for UDI to sort of replicate what we try to do in our typical luncheon series. Of course, this year has been a little bit different, but we always want to make sure that we're adding value to our membership and providing educational opportunities and learning opportunities for different facets of our industry. And today would be no exception with our speaker, Ben Smith. So it looks like we've got kind of our full complement of people. So I'm going to start. One thing I'll just remind everyone today is that there'll be a number of slides, and the recording will be made available after the event for those of you who may have missed it or want to share with other colleagues that you have. And I'll also just highlight up front here before we get going that, like our other webinars, we will have a time for a question and answer period afterwards with Ben. And I'll help facilitate that. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function within Zoom here, and we'll be sure to get to those, and we'll have some time for that near the end of the program. So without further ado, I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar on the new horizon of e-commerce real estate with Ben Smith of Kinsman Marketing Partners. I'm sure a number of you will remember Ben, as he's graciously given his time to speak with UDI on a number of different occasions and has some great industry insight to share with us today. So thank you, Ben, in advance. I'll also mention that we're very pleased that our executive sponsor today is Avesdo, and I'd like to thank them for sponsoring today's event. And before I bring Jonathan from Avesdo, I'll just read the statement from them as our sponsor. Avesdo provides deal management software for our industry and the online sales platform Offplan to new construction real estate developers and sales teams. And their enterprise solutions deliver sales confidence, a reduction of risk, and total legal compliance across your organization. Avesdo's cloud-based software gives your sales and administrative team access to deals and inventory anytime, anywhere, with accurate, up-to-date information. Optimize new construction real estate sales and mitigate the risks of costly errors to generate more revenue and operate with certainty. So at this point, I'd like to call on Jonathan Tice, the Chief Revenue Officer with Avesdo, to make a brief presentation, and then he will be introducing today's speaker more formally. Jonathan. I think you're just on mute, Jonathan.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate you doing the vendor pitch so I don't have to. Seriously, Jennifer and yourself have been great to work with UDI Okanagan, and we're really happy part of this community as well as this event. As Luke said, I'm Jonathan Tice. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer, and I was recently joined to help the organization expand its reach in the new home development market. Our industry is a critical one to our nation's growth and overall well-being, and I'm honored to be part of this ecosystem. I will say that just to put in simpler terms, what Luke said is, we provide a sales platform that facilitates new home sales transactions. Everything from reserving that home online with a credit card, through completing the contract, through managing the life of that contract through till the close of the contract. And so the entire spectrum of that relationship. Builders and their sales marketing teams sell their homes faster with greater confidence and certainty with our platforms and in compliance with the relevant local regulatory bodies. We serve about over 160 developers across Canada. And given this is an Okanagan event, I wanted to give a shout out to the mission group, including Luke, thank you, as well as Kirchhoff Construction, two very long-standing and wonderful clients of ours, and also to Uniontown Developments, our most recent client in the area. So that's all I'm going to say about Avesdo. If you want more information, you hit us up at info@avesdo.com or our website. And of course, we can add any questions or answers at the end. You know, back in the 1990s, late 1990s, I ran country marketing for a company called Netscape. And so that might bring a smile to some of your faces if you remember them. But back then, the expression was the internet changes everything. Well, fast forward today, you can pretty much say the same thing about our past year. This has been as much about dealing and battling with COVID as it has been in coming to terms with the changes that won't go back. This evolution has had an impact on our lives in many ways. Our daily lives, managing new routines, enabling kids to learn in new and different ways, and often with mixed results from both the parents and the kids. It's impacted the concept of what a home is. For me, maybe many of you, the last 8 months have felt more like living at work than working at home. And of course, this has all impacted those who are on this webinar in terms of how we design, build, and sell new homes. And so with that said, we're honored, Vesda's honored to be sponsoring a webinar entitled The New Horizon of E-commerce Real Estate by Ben Smith. I'm equally honored to get the opportunity to introduce him, so I'll do that now. Ben Smith from Kinsman Marketing Partner, who works with many of our clients, is going to share his experience of online selling in both the tempo sales and pre-launch. What I'm really looking forward to hearing about is what's worked and what hasn't, for how buyers, realtors, and sales teams have responded, how it's changed the way we think of the presentation center and the customer journey, and about what the future might hold for online new home sales. So I'll turn it over to Ben to explain what he means by e-commerce sales transactions and what it means to our industry. Over to you, Ben.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm just going to share my screen here. Everyone hear me okay? Okay. So I've been speaking to you guys for over 10 years. Some of you may have been around since the beginning, and if you were, you'll know how excited I am about this because I've been saying we will sell online for many, many years. And I think a lot of you probably thought I was nuts. I wasn't even sure myself when it was going to happen. But I'm really excited to be here today and tell you it's happening and we're doing it. And we get to share some experiences today. I'm speaking on behalf of Kinsman, but also 2 companies that I've been working with and testing this with. And I can share some experiences in both tempo and launch phases. So a quick shout out to those companies, Grand Long Holdings and Aluen International. So I'm going to get right into it. Again, you've seen me before. If you have, I'll try and rip through this fairly quickly so that we can leave lots of room for questions. One thing I will start with is I'll say that, first, let me figure out, there we go. Okay, I'm going to start with what I started with last time. So in 2017, I actually gave a presentation to you guys about technology. And I led with this quote from Steve Jobs, and I think it's still relevant, that older people sit down and ask, what is it? But the boy asks, what can I do with it? So that's my focus today, is to talk to you about this new idea of selling online. And what I want to focus on is what can we do with it? Because that's really the important question. Otherwise, it's just glitter. And so this was our goal last time. We're going to consider technology gadgetry, also get an understanding of technology's direct and indirect impact on all aspects of the sales and marketing process. Quick update to that. We're going to do the same thing. So we have this thing called online sales. We're able to do it. And so what I want to talk about is what is the impact to our processes now that we can do this. So I don't really want to focus too much time on what it is. I want to focus on how we're using it and share my experiences in doing that. So I'm going to date myself here. Again, 10 years ago when I started talking to you guys, I had hair, so that's a big change, but I'm going to date myself again. And my reference point is, with all technologies, they start somewhere. And so the typewriter was a technology that evolved into a computer. But before it did that, some of you might not even know what this is, but this is called a word processor. And really all it did was digitize the typewriter. And we had to go through this phase before we got to this phase, which is the computer. And these companies don't even really exist anymore doing word processors, but we needed it in the transition. And so I would say this is where we're at today. We're in this zone where we haven't fully got to the end result. And I'll share at the end some thoughts on where I think this is going, but we're in the first stages. And so if you didn't understand any of that, maybe I'll use this. We started with an iPod, which just really digitized music. That's all it did. And then we got ourselves to a computer in your pocket with the iPhone. And so I think in those early stages, if we use the same reference, you'll understand that we're starting to digitize processes. And that's going to lead to a whole bunch of other opportunities as we keep going. So just like iPods digitize music, very quickly we realize music is media, and what other medias could we digitize? We can do photos, videos, all these other things, and it started to evolve from there. So hopefully you'll get a sense of how we might evolve this as we go. So where are we now? Very quickly, I pulled these from the interweb. Basically, everything's going online. I mean, we're seeing that. Everyone announces it. I like this quote at the bottom from one of the partners at McKinsey. And he says, if people have grown accustomed to digital experiences like online banking, telehealth, or e-commerce, they expect similar from the spaces in which they live, work, play, and shop. And I think that's so true. We're seeing specifically, this slide is only important in as much as it's showing the increase in sales in some new categories for e-commerce, medical being a massive one. I expect most of you on the call have maybe had to have a doctor's appointment recently and had the joy of doing it virtually, which is so much better. It took like 15 minutes for me to have a appointment with a surgeon. So that stuff's great. I think you can see as well down low there, we have household and some of those things that aren't normally online e-commerce driven, and we're starting to see more of that. So that's a starting point for this conversation. The next one would be, this just counts the number of orders by category. So you can see that these new categories, hardware as an example, vehicles and parts are really increasing dramatically in this time period. So I think that goes to show that, real estate's one of those things as well. And I'm going to tell you about how we've seen that increase. The starting point I want to talk about, though, is this idea of digital marketing versus digital sales. So if you're like me and you're in a marketing position or a sales position, you're getting inundated with vendors telling you that they have a digital sales platform. And I want to make this distinction because they're not all digital sales. And that's not to diminish them, but there's a difference between digital sales and digital marketing. And let's get into that really quickly. Digital marketing is really focused on marketing. That's your VR, it's your SEM, it's social media, it's all of those things. And that's not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about is digital sales. And digital sales is about transaction. It's about taking payment and actually doing the order. So if we looked at that really conceptually, within the customer journey, if we started with, targeting these people with our marketing, we move those people along to become leads, hopefully. Those leads we turn into prospects. From there, we get them to select something, and then we get them to write a contract. But in our business, we've got rescission, so there's a difference between a contract written and then a contract firm, and then we get into the after sales. And so most of these things within the digital marketing realm are that front end. They're really looking at how do we gather leads and prospects? How do we move people from being a target through to being a prospect? But as their marketing tools, they might kind of dip their feet into selection, which we're seeing with some of these new virtual environments, but they don't get past selection because they can't transact. And so I think that's the big shift that we're talking about. And when I explain it, it seems so simple. It almost seems like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, really, why is that such a big deal? Why are you so excited about it? But it is really a big deal. And I think one of the points I use to illustrate this is really what value we attach to these two different functions. So let's go back to, how we do that today, even before e-commerce. And so when we think about leads, we pay for those by a CPC, cost per click. So if you go and buy an ad with Google, you're going to pay them a cost per click. And those clicks, I can't remember, it's been a while since I booked one of those myself, but from memory, a Vancouver condo ad is basically $12 per click. So we're in the small dollar value ranges. Whereas the portion that I'm speaking to, the transaction portion, we'll pay a realtor up to 4% of revenue. So there's a really big difference already in the value we attach to each. And there's a bunch of reasons for that I won't get into. but it's probably because with leads, we need to get a whole bunch of them. And they're not all going to convert, only some of them will. And that's why we're not willing to pay as much for them. But we're willing to pay for the ones that will convert. And we're willing to pay at a number that's a percentage of revenue. And so I illustrate this just to illustrate the point of its importance and how, as we start playing in this section, the impact it's going to have on our business. You know, the one thing I don't like about these webinars is I can't see nodding heads to see if you're tracking, but I'm going to hope that you're still with me. So let's get into this. So tempo sales. Tempo sales is really the process of once you've already launched and you're having a steady process of sales pathing. And so I'm going to start with this one. Usually we start with a launch and then we move into tempo. But for today, I'm going to start with tempo only because the first time we launched the ability to sell online was with a tempo project. So that was our first learnings came out of that environment. So that's what I'm going to speak to first. So how does selling online impact tempo sales and how did we use it? Well, first of all, the impetus was we were closed. So COVID hit, sales offices are closing all over the place. And of course, the client comes to me and says, you're always talking about selling online. How quickly can you get it up and running? And so we were able to work with Avesto. They had been working on it on a platform, and we were able to get launched and up and running by June. We had our first sale, I believe it was June 11th or sometime around that point, and it happened at 8 o'clock at night when our sales office was closed. Even if we had been open at the time, which we were not, it still would have been closed because it was 8 o'clock at night. So that's the context. So the very first thing, you know, what did this e-commerce platform allow us to do? It allowed us to be open. It allowed us to just sell. And so even if we had some of these virtual presentation centers and things like that, we still didn't have the ability to transact. And so we say, well, okay, well, we were open by appointments. So the problem with appointments that we were facing was that people would book an appointment and then maybe they want to come back. So it would take them maybe a week to do the first appointment. And then if they wanted to come back, it'd take them another week. So now we're into 2 weeks. In that time frame, you know, 27 of their relatives told them they're crazy for even thinking about buying a home during a pandemic. So the chances of losing those people were very high. And so the ability to be able to just send them a link to a piece of inventory that they could log on and purchase was huge. And in that time frame, we started to get real momentum by using that. You know, what did we learn? At first, we thought maybe people would just go online and do it themselves. That was not our experience. I think we're still in that, like I say, we're in the word processor. I can't even remember what it's called. Word processor phase. So we didn't lose the visit altogether. But what we did do is people came for the first visit. They didn't need to come back. Once they'd seen the scale model and once they've seen the display and they understand how the project works, the rest of it could be done virtually. So that's where those virtual tools started coming in, where we could narrow selection and then actually transact via credit card payment. So same thing with the banks. The next thing was, well, yeah, okay, I'm ready to purchase. That's great, but I got to go to the banks and get these funds for you. And, you know, that's going to take me a week to do because they're not open or they're busy or whatever. So the credit card portion of this transaction was huge because then we could say, well, no, just do your credit card for the initial deposit. And now you're going to spend your rescission period the next 7 days going to the bank and getting your funds to increase deposit. But at that point, we've already got a contract in place. We've already got commitment. And so that really sped it up and helped to, as our sales teams were telling me, it's helping us not lose sales. So I think when we started out on this road, we were thinking, how do we help gain sales? But in the very early days, it was really about not losing them. So we were using these typical methods, but then combining them with this new technology to confirm them and so as not to lose them. So it really brought a lot of certainty around those prospects. The next thing we noticed is we're using it as a committed negotiation tool. So probably in your sales office, in June especially, everyone thought the world was ending, so everyone wanted to negotiate with you. And the problem with negotiation is you don't know who's real and who's not, because some of them are just, tire kickers and fishing, I call it, if they can find a deal. And so what this allowed us to do is we could enter into those negotiations. So it was very easy to say, well, I'll just send you a link. You can put in your credit card and put down the initial deposit, and then we can work out the details of the contract afterwards. But now I know you're committed. And if you're unwilling to put down that money, then I know that your commitment level is not really there. And so this was a great tool. And in fact, this was the tool we used to get that very first sale. The very first sale came by way of a realtor who we had done business with previously, who came to us and said, I'm really interested in buying a home actually for myself, but would you give me a better deal on the deposit structure? To which our answer was, great, I'm going to email you this unit that you're interested in. If you show us commitment by putting in your credit card and buying that home tonight, then yes, we will work with you on that deal. And by 8 o'clock at night, the deposit came in. So that's a really strong tool, not only to figure out who the tire kickers are, but also to get that commitment so that you as a developer have certainty around, am I negotiating with someone who's just looking for a good price and going to drop me and then go tell everybody, or are they actually really committed to this process? I'll say this a lot. In the past, we would do this by way of personal check, right? But I mean, I'll write you a personal check today. If I know you're not going to cash it, it doesn't feel committed. But if I have your funds, and when I say funds, this is a question that's going to come up later about REDMA, I don't actually take your funds. I just take the authorization. But for the purchaser, that credit is gone. There is a level of commitment there, and it's not super easy to reverse that. It takes some time for it to go back and be put back on their credit card. So very strong tool. I'm going to rip through as well. We're at 12:24. Okay. The last tool that became very valuable is this idea of people were spread out all over the country and potentially the world. My parents live in Ontario. That's a long way from here. We know that nowadays most purchases are getting at least $100,000 of help from their parents. Typically that process is, oh, my parents are going to come out and see this big purchase we want to make, or they're going to give us the down payment and have to facilitate that. How do you do that when there's COVID lockdowns and your parents can't come visit? So the ability to say, well, we'll just email your parents and they can see the floor plan, they can see the renderings, what you're looking at, and they can put their credit card down to start this purchase. That became a tool that was quite helpful as well. So let's get into sales launch, which is really the exciting one. Within sales launch, we did a launch this fall in Richmond. It was for a high-rise tower. And the real question was, as we're entering into this, was how are we going to do this? We can't have big groups. The project we did it on already had a PC. So like I say, we're still, we need to think about how are we going to use this to plan future projects where we can fully plan them from scratch. But in this case, it already had a PC. So we're thinking, what are we going to use that PC for, et cetera, et cetera. So let me get into it. I think here's this is actually one central. This is a typical launch. So I don't know about you, but nowadays that just, gives me the heebie-jeebies to see that many people that closely tied together. So we can't do that anymore. And in fact, we need that process because all those people need to see that somebody else is there and interested. And that's what's creating the demand, which allows us to increase prices and do all these things. So what happens when you can't fill a room with 50 people? In fact, you can't fill more than a few people and they have to be 6 feet apart. So this was one of our challenges. What do you do with a $4 million presentation center? Not that we all have $4 million presentation centers, but presentation centers have definitely grown and gotten bigger. And do we really need them? What is the role? So backing up on what is the role, in our case, the role of the PC became the place to preview. And so our thinking shifted from this is a place we're going to close deals and we're going to create that event hype to no, this is the place we're going to preview and get people educated, but the sale is going to happen elsewhere. It's going to happen, over the internet, virtually. And so this is actually not that new an idea. It's pretty common if you think about, in your youth buying tickets to a concert and you log on at a certain time and all the homes are released. And that's quite common. Or for those with kids, this is kind of how it works when you're trying to get your kid into kindergarten or to swimming classes and, it's Saturday morning and it slips on and you got to get on first before anybody else. So with that same thing in mind, we used our presentation center for a couple-week preview period where we brought people through as individual groups. And the goal was to show them the scale model, show them the display, which I had learned about in the Tempo program with the other project, and learned that they needed to see that. And then the goal of the day was to get them, or their appointment was to get them to be able to narrow down what they wanted so that we could get selection from them. And then over that time period, what it allowed us to do is collect our selection sheets so we know where the demand is. And then we were able to send out all at the same time the allocations. Here's what you got. Here's the email. You now have 24 hours or whatever the time limit we set to take that unit. And so again, it allowed us to have a system that didn't force them to come back. They didn't have to worry about getting the bank draft for that opening day. It was just credit card driven. And then once all that was done and they had certainty about what they were buying, they could go and get that bank draft from the bank. So a couple things. How did we create urgency then? Well, we used this time limit function. And so we had the ability to set a time frame for you've got 24 hours to do this. What was nice is the ability to do this across different product types. So let's say we've got a 1-bedroom that we know we've got tons of demand for. Well, your urgency is going to be higher because we're going to set your time limit really short. Because I know I got 4 other people lined up who will take that unit. Whereas maybe something where I know I got 1 buyer for that large 3-bedroom on the top floor at a big number, well, then maybe we give them a little bit longer. We know the process might be a little bit longer and we're willing to allow for that. So we have the flexibility to do that just by allowing that link to timeout. How do we manage our channels? So especially in a concrete high-rise tower launch, you've got many different distribution channels. And you like my little illustrations there, those are meant to be whales, dolphins, and they're the different levels of realtor groups that we tend to deal with, the public being one of those groups. And so it was really easy to manage our distribution because, again, literally sending out links, we just pick the realtor, the purchaser, we can select which homes they we're going to give to who, and we have a real clear picture of where all those allocations are going to. The other nice thing about that is with this capability linked with the allocation timeline, we have the ability to get stuff back quick. And so, you don't take something back in inventory because the person didn't want it and then have to wait for or make the phone call to the next person, get them to come in, blah, blah, blah. No, we can very quickly just reallocate it to that person. The email goes out and they're able to take advantage of that available unit. So again, these are all concepts that we're used to. We just digitize them essentially, right? So this idea of gaining visibility as well, we're all used to seeing a grid. This is a demo site, but what I want to call out to you is typically the colors on this grid is either red or maybe you've got some yellows, but you don't have a ton of visibility into what's going on. Really all you can see in my job as kind of the corporate person overseeing what's happening is I can see what's been sold and I can see what's within rescission, but I can't see much else. So now with this ability and this other layer of allocation and then this reservation system, there's these other steps I can see. So who cares? Why do I care about that? Well, why I care about that, and I didn't realize this was going to be something, but it allowed me to raise prices on things that I couldn't raise prices before, and it allowed me to manage inventory better. Let me quickly explain. So typically, if all I can see is what's sold, and all of those who have done my job before, you felt this pain, I'm sure. You go to raise the price on it. You see that, let's say over here on the far left, you can see, oh, there's those 2 plans left. Man, we better raise those prices quick. Well, in a normal scenario, I don't know what's been allocated. I only know what's sold. So I may go to try to raise the price on that. And invariably what happens is the sales staff comes back and goes, oh no, you can't do that. I just sent out that contract, but I don't know that. And so I lose the opportunity most times because they say, you know, we got to honor this, like that's the price. So I've lost that opportunity to raise the price. So what I found by having this digitally is I could see sooner where things were at. So I could start to anticipate, okay, we've got 1 sold, we've got 1 in rescission, we've got 1 that's been allocated. Okay, well, if all those come through, I only have 2 homes left. I better get on raising those prices quickly before I lose that opportunity. On the flip side, the same thing can happen for a stack of homes that aren't selling. So when I look at it, again, if I only see sold, I can't tell the difference between the stack that's got tons of interest and has 5 homes sent out for contract, but everything on my grid is blank, versus the stack that has no interest, is also blank, but there's nothing sent out. Now I can see that. I can see very quickly where the allocations lie and start to get a sense of the demand based on not just what's sold or what's in rescission, but also based on what's been allocated or sent out. How is that all facilitated? Again, it's really easy to share. I literally click on, what this screen's here showing is if I clicked on one of those grids, this thing pops up. I'm able to share it. I get this email that says, here's the home that you've been allocated. I can click on that view and reserve button, and I can see the various information, and I can literally, with the click of a button, purchase it. It's really that simple. If you see it here, I put in my name, my phone number, and my email address, and away we go. It's, again, really that simple. The rest of the information and all that stuff happens within the contract phase. But again, I've already got commitment. So that's been really invaluable. I'm going to move along here. And then, of course, once you get going, everything's digital within the signing. And so everything starts from within the system. So we'll talk about this later about what opportunities that's going to give to us. But that's kind of use case, how we've used it in a couple scenarios. I'm going to quickly get into where I think we're headed, and I think I'll be on time here for questions. So I apologize if I'm running quickly, but hopefully this is all making sense to you. So where are we headed? So hopefully you can see, and you're already starting to think about the different ways you could use this and what's happening. The irony of these next couple slides is these are the same slides I included in my 2017 presentation when I talked about what's going to happen with sales processes. So I think you're going to see marketplaces. You're going to see online places, whether it's Amazon, Google, or even MLS, where you're going to be able to go and purchase things. And I think as time goes on and people get more and more used to this, they're going to do it either with and without visiting the sales center. Virtual sales teams. This is something we're already starting to see. Is sales teams are having to get really good at how to run a process online. One of the interesting questions I get asked all the time, and what people used to say to me when they were naysayers, is no, buyers aren't ready for this. I can tell you the issue hasn't been the buyers. The issue has been the sales teams and the realtors. And when I say issues, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that they're used to running a process a certain way. And so the real change management that had to happen was not with the buyers, it was with those teams. And it was getting them used to very simple phrasing, right? If you've sold 1,000 homes in your life, you're used to saying, great, why don't we set up an appointment to come back and do this? Why don't you go get a bank draft and we'll set up an appointment to come in and see you this Saturday? Again, really simple things. We have to retrain our brains to say, that's great. Why don't I send this link to you tonight? And when you're home with the decision makers, you can all talk about it. And if you're interested, you can just pay for it with your credit card right now. So it's a subtle shift, but it's just training you to think and channel your sales process in a different way. It gives you some new tools to overcome objections. And so, virtual sales teams might be a thing in the future where you have people that are really great at that virtual process, and then you have other teams that are really great at the in-person process, and maybe they're different. I think this is already happening in the US, so it's just a matter of time till it becomes more pervasive. I think this is a big one, dynamic pricing. One thing we're very good at in real estate is dynamic pricing, but we do it manually. We look at demand, we gauge demand, we change prices on the fly, we do things with inventory to help manage our ability to raise prices as we need to, and be able to mask it. Also to be able to mask when we've had to lower prices so that we're not making anybody mad. As this becomes more and more digital, we'll be able to do this dynamically. So some of you might know, I live in Whistler, and in Whistler, if you want to buy a lift ticket from Vail this year, you are not allowed to buy it in advance. You can only buy it on that day. And why? Because if it's a POW day, they're going to crank the prices, or if it's Christmas or whatever. But they have the ability to, with demand, change what that pricing looks like. And whether we like it or not, we accept it. So I see very much this is going to be easier for us to do in the future in our business as we're managing our grid and able to see demand coming in. This is a huge one. I don't know if, I didn't even realize, to be honest, how many of them there were until I pulled this slide. But this is just the number of payment facilities within Canada. And some of them you're probably very familiar with, some of them you may have never heard of. But now that you go to digital, the ability to take many different kinds of payment, it has far-reaching implications. Certainly the other day I went to park somewhere and I got the option to pay with WePay or Alipay. So as we're becoming more global and people are living in multiple places, this doesn't make them foreign buyers necessarily. They just live more globally, so they're here for 6 months, there for 6 months, whatever. This allows them to use payment types that they're used to. Certainly, cross-border stuff within the States. We're starting to see more Americans, certainly in Vancouver, and I know you guys already have that, in Kelowna with some of the tech companies moving up. So I think that has big implications, and certainly payment being digital, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen with that, which I'll start to get into. This is live and happening today. This is a contest at the University of UBC, where other areas within our process are starting to digitize. So looking to what does it look like when BC Land Titles goes digital? What does it look like when some of these systems that we plug into and these processes go digital? Already you saw within COVID immediately, we had to change some of our FinTrek regulations. And how can you ID somebody if they're not present? And so those things are already changing and becoming digital. I remember way back the first time we started doing digital contracts with DocuSign. And I remember lawyers saying, no, we can't do that. Everything has to be paper. And so we've come a long way. And so this next step is, again, that digitization of it. If you've got a contract that's starting digitally, you've got, the land titles process and all these back-end things digital, how is that going to change how we do things? Certainly blockchain, all the major banks, this is a slide from previous, are looking at ways to offer mortgages and things like that through these new digital systems that make it easy for that. So what I imagine is you'll be able to transact online, or let's start from the beginning. Maybe you're going to come through an ad on one of the websites that you're served up. You click through, you're going to see a piece of inventory that you want to buy. You're going to buy it with a digital process. Everything's going to be done through email. You're going to sign it digitally. All your FinTrek's going to be done digitally. Now you're a purchaser. You're going to get asked to increase your deposit. You're going to click on a button from an email you get that's sent out automatically based on the requirements of the contract. And you're going to pay your deposit with Apple Pay or your iTunes account or whatever it may be. And then you're going to get close to closing, and you're going to get an email that comes out automatic that says your closing is coming up. Here are all the papers you need to sign for your conveyance. That's all tied into land titles and the transfer of those titles. At the same point, there's going to be a little button that says, click this button if you don't have a mortgage yet, and you're going to apply for a mortgage online immediately. And that entire process could be digital. And some of you are probably squirming and thinking that's just a horrible, horrible thought. While as others, I am guaranteeing you are sitting there going, that would make my life so much easier. So that's what I can imagine. And this is where we're headed. So with that, I'm at 12:41. I'm going to leave you now, just close off, and then we'll get into some questions. And what I'd like you to think about, these are some articles and quotes that came out of Forbes and in light of some things happening with COVID. And the way I think about this is, right now, this quote, make hay while the sun shines, but sharpen your tools while it's raining. Some of you I even spoke to in early days, and you said, tell me about this online sales thing. And they said, oh, I'm not just ready, you know, why are you doing it? And I said, well, because I feel like now's the time we need to sharpen our tools while it's raining. We need to get ready for the future. We need to get ready for these systems coming up, because they are going to be extremely disruptive, and we need to be ready. I wonder if the heads of GM were given that same call to action before Tesla came and became the world's largest auto manufacturer, or whether they sat back and said, oh, it's never going to happen, people will never do it. So I think in all categories, CEOs who are looking forward digitally and looking for this transformation and starting to prepare are going to be the leaders of the future. So I like this quote, much like the financial sector coming out of the great financial crisis or global financial crisis, the large institutions who adapt to technology, shift to digital, and become more agile will be winners in the future. The battleground has shifted from bricks and mortar to data and insights, which will be enabled by an ecosystem of property-focused technology companies. You know, I'd love to sit here and tell you that 10 years ago when I said that we were going to be here, that I get to say I told you so. But spoiler alert, our industry is the last to the party. So I'm really not that smart. All I've done is just watch what every other industry has done and then said it's probably coming to ours. So with that, I'm going to leave you and say, this is coming. I don't think it's an if, it's a when. I encourage you to think about it as an inevitability and to start to think about how do you prepare your companies, how do you prepare your staff and your labor force who have to execute on these things? How do you start to change how you think about sales and marketing to be ready to incorporate some of these things that are happening? So with that, I'll say thank you. Again, this is weird. I can't see if you're nodding, if you're following along, but I guess we'll find out in questions, and we'll move to that now.
Thanks very much, Ben. I was nodding a lot. I know you couldn't see, but I know we've got a number of participants today. And again, appreciate your time. Lots of interesting stuff. And I think, by the way, before we get into the questions, you're looking great. Hair or no hair, doesn't matter. No issues there.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time. So I guess, we've got a few questions coming in, and I'm sure there'll be more. I'll just encourage any of the participants. We've got some time here. There's a Q&A bar. Usually it's at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom call. Feel free to add through the chat, and we'll just get into some questions for Ben. I guess one question I would have, just sort of to start, as you were thinking about, if you're thinking about as a company, trying to take advantage of some of the things you're looking at in creating less friction, really, for that transaction. What are some of the bigger levers? What are some of maybe the first steps for some smaller companies that be looking at, this sort of digitization process?
Sure. So there's three moves that I like to start out with. The first move is that move that says, how do we get our sales staff to start saying, why don't I just email it to you? So move number one is, let's stop that delay of trying to get people to come back. Certainly in harder markets, people are wanting to come back more times to a sales office to do a transaction. So the first move is, let's try to do just one visit. And in that visit, let's give them the information they need to see so that the rest of it can be done digitally. We do know most people would rather just deal with things on the phone or through email. They tell us that all the time. We've bucked it because in the past, we didn't have the ability to transact. You needed to come in order to transact. So it's really starting to shift and get people asking or changing that call to action to, why don't I just send it to you? So that's number one. And that will shorten that time period between the visits and shorten the opportunity for someone to intercept them in between their visits. The next one is related to payment. So when they say, well, I need to go get my bank draft and et cetera, you say, well, why don't we just get you to pay with a credit card? We have this right here. And then you can use your 7 days, which is plenty of time to go and figure out your bank stuff. And that one, again, that doesn't even have to be virtual. The person could be sitting right across from you, and it's just getting used to saying, hey, there's this other option, this other method of payment. And as we start using that system, then it's going to get in the salespeople's heads and start becoming a tool for them to use. What's interesting is we found that over 60% of the people in that launch chose to use a credit card rather than a bank draft. And we find that customers quite like it. It gives them the ability to get points, which we all love points. But the sales staff also like it, because if somebody doesn't have $10,000 or $10,000 is what we've been doing on credit, then they're probably not that qualified to purchase that home, or certainly not in our market. And so it's a great qualifying tool that if someone's either not willing to put it down or they don't have the space, maybe it's not going to follow through. So that's number two. And then the third one has totally escaped me. So I'm going to let it go.
No sweat. Well, if you think of it, we'll get back to that. Maybe I'll switch a little bit to a couple of questions I've got in the area of rental market. Have you seen any of these sort of tactics being used when it comes to apartment leasing?
Yeah, I don't do any of that myself, but definitely it is happening within the leasing platform. I'm hearing similar things. People like to come and have a visit, at least one, especially because it's owner occupier, much more so than even in our condo market, where a large number of them might be investors who are happy just to buy off a plan. But generally speaking, for renters, they want to come see it if they can. And so definitely there's platforms getting created to make that transaction happen online. And for them, even more so than us, it's a valuable tool because you want to continue to have that ongoing dialogue with that tenant. Oftentimes in the sales scenario, you start to lose touch until they're ready to buy again. 5 years from now is sort of the trend. But on a rental side, you want to have touch points a lot tighter and a lot sooner. They may only live there for a year or two, and you want to ensure that you're staying close to them. So definitely some exciting stuff happening on the rental side.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And you have ongoing transactions to deal with that could also help in that same sort of system. Another question just regarding, so that you talk certainly about the value add, this sort of process, whether it comes to, less friction for purchasers. As an example, dynamic pricing is another example in terms of being digitized. Are there inherent risks in the current process that we have that this digitized form of sales process can help alleviate?
Totally. I think of anyone who's been around, even in their mid 2000s. I used to work at Polygon. We had a person there who almost their whole job was just auditing contracts. And why did we need that person? Well, because unfortunately, manual process of filling out a contract is not that reliable. And so there was a lot of stuff related to that where it doesn't matter how experienced that person was, things would get missed, or they just wouldn't get signed, or maybe on a launch scenario, you could have 10 different contract writers, and so contracts look 10 different ways. And so just by having things digital, you can really force how that contract is signed. You can force how addendums are used. You can force that they cannot move forward until everything is filled out properly. So that's number one. Number two is the nice thing about digital is everything's timestamped. So you know exactly when things are happening. And if there's ever any question, you can quickly pull it up and say, well, I see that you were given the disclosure statement at this time. I see that the transaction was done at this time. I see that you firmed up the contract at this time. Like, all that stuff is stamped now. I've had a scenario already where a real great thing about this is the 7-day rescission. So, you know, as we know, sometimes, especially in harder markets, we firm up that contract and then we hold our breath. And we hope that within 7 days, it's going to go firm and we're all good. And we want to get it signed as quick as we can so that, you know, that 7 days is as 7 days as it can be and doesn't stretch into 10 days or whatever the case. Well, an interesting thing happened, which was good, but it was something we had to learn, and we learned it the hard way, was that thing firmed up, and it was a credit card payment. So the money went into the trust account exactly on the 7 days. And for the realtor who had done the deal, and for our sales staff who came in too late and said, hey, I want to rescind. It's like, well, actually, the deal is done. By the clock, which is set up to do it exactly when it's supposed to do it, it did it and you missed it. And there isn't that hangover of, well, I was hoping you hadn't brought the check to the lawyer yet, or any of that stuff. And so I'll tell you, we weren't total jerks in the scenario. We did allow it to happen, and we had to unwind it, and it took some time. But it was an amazing lesson for the sales staff of like, no, this is serious. And we need to, these things are going to firm up fast and on time, and there isn't that slush anymore. And you don't have that like, well, just rip up my check. Like, there is real commitment that happens. And I'd say from a developer standpoint, that's a really positive thing.
Oh, that makes sense. Are there other markets that you're seeing? Like, is BC or our industry or our part of the world anyway, sort of behind the times? Are they more ahead in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, certainly China's way ahead of everybody, it seems, in everything. But people are buying and selling homes online. You know, I think Australia as a market, they tend to do more of an auction style of selling. So it's easier for them to facilitate this kind of scenario as well. So they're starting to dabble a bit. You know, I think generally speaking, our industry is behind across the board. I think it's exciting that we're doing this in BC because we tend to be seen as leaders, but we also have the most regulation. So I would say one of the things that kept us from doing this sooner was trying to figure out how to conform to REDMA and how to deal with compliance issues. And so it's been great to see that happening. And just maybe a quick point on that. There's been several lawyers, at least that I'm aware of within BC, and certainly on my 2 projects, 2 different lawyers who've had to vet it. And at first, both of them were sort of backs up. And then on the one, by the end of it, she's like, this is great. I've done 4 of these now with 4 different clients. It's so easy. I just get my clerk to do it. And it's all conforms. This is great. It takes out a lot of administration work that they used to have to do. So that's been great. So I would say, yeah, it's happening elsewhere. We seem to be leading this a little bit, but I expect it's going to get pervasive quick.
Some of that is, you know, as you said, sort of fear in the unknown. And if you would have told somebody 10, maybe even 5 years ago that it would have been prevalent to buy a vehicle online, which is not necessarily a commodity in the way you would buy something small on Amazon, but it's an emotional purchase. You know, Tesla comes to mind. That's happening, and so that certainly is ahead. Those industries are ahead of the real estate. Do you think that it makes a difference, depending on maybe demographic, maybe isn't the right term, but the end user of a particular home? I'm thinking of, you know, a downsizing empty nester is different in terms of what they're looking for, what their expectations are, than maybe a first-time home buyer, or maybe someone looking as an investment for a rental condominium. Does their willingness to take part in these sort of transactions change depending on the end user?
Great question. I get that a lot. I'd say the answer is yes and no. So I'd say, again, where we're at right now, people are still coming in to see us, which is universal. Whether you're a first-time buyer and you're really savvy with technology, or you're an empty nester. And what's been similar is on the back end, once you've seen it, all ages are willing to just pay with a credit card. And in fact, in some cases, the baby boomers who are downsizing, you think they'd want to do everything old school, they don't have time to waste. So they're like, you know what? Yeah, you can email it to me. Perfect. Because I got a golf game that I got to get to, and I don't want to make an appointment to come see you. So it's really about which piece of it are they going to be comfortable with? So maybe that person's, not going to get to the point where they'll buy it online sight unseen, but they're certainly happy to do the transaction portion of it online. I think maybe we're going to see a millennial is more likely to be willing to come in and just, yeah, I've seen the floor plan. I know what this is. I've seen the renderings. I'm fine with it. Or I've done the VR or whatever. That might be a difference in the different age groups. But as far as the transaction, as that one quote from McKinsey was saying, we are so used to doing transactions online. I haven't seen it be an impediment. Again, there's a small number of people who say, no, I like to write a check. But I think that's more of a mentality than an age thing necessarily.
Sure, that makes sense. Luckily, we're not doing fax machines all that much, but I suppose there are still people who trust that process. Just in the interest of time, we'll probably do one more question. And I know that you're involved very much, not just in the sales side you talked about today, but obviously the marketing side as well, as you've spoken to our group about before. And of course, they're very much interrelated. So do you get a sense that there's a potential that even your marketing or your prospecting strategy could change based on this new form of sales transaction?
100%. So I think I probably surprised you guys in the past because people would always assume, oh, you're into these digital things and da 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 da. So why wouldn't you like VR and some of these technologies that were coming out early? And I've always told you guys wasn't an adopter of those things. And the reason for it was because you couldn't transact. And my whole thinking was, I don't want to create an amazing experience for you at home until you can actually transact there too. Because all it was doing was lengthening the sales process. So at that point, I needed to get you back. Like, I got to get you into the sales office because you won't do the decision or the transaction unless you're here. So to me, this changes everything. Now I can use those things. Now I'm very willing to look at those technologies and say, hey, how can we leverage those? Because now I can actually get you to transact. I can do that call to action and fulfill on that marketing. Whereas previously I could not. So it was actually burdensome and making it worse. This opens the floodgates to how do we deal with this? So to me now it's just about time. And that's why I use that reference of, we're in the iPod or the word processor stage in that, we're still pretty tied to our presentation centers and we're still tied to some of those tools. And we're in the process of changing how we use those tools, but we're still pretty connected. I think it won't be too long till we're willing to let some of those things go. I know we're short for time here, but I get questioned a lot, like, great, do I need this PC still? Do I still got to spend that, on the cheap end, $500,000 to build this thing? And my answer is, unfortunately, I think you still do, but what you build can be different. You don't need to build an event center anymore. You just need to show them the scale model and the display suite. That's what they want to see. And then everything else could be done elsewhere. So let's start working with that. But eventually we will get to a spot where these digital marketing things will really come into the arena and we'll start to gain more and more acceptance and adoption, and then it'll change quick.
Well, that'll make sense. And if 2020 has been an opportunity for anything, it's been to kind of rethink a lot of the ways that we do things, not just in our industry, obviously, but globally. And so lots of exciting stuff. And Ben, really appreciate your time again, speaking to UDI Okanagan, and thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me. We'll look forward to seeing you in another 5 years from now.
Well, sooner the better. No problem here. So with that, I will, just in the interest of time, of course, sign off on this webinar. I just want to remind everyone that the recording for this will be made available on the UDI website. If you have any comments or recommendations on future events, future webinars, interested in sponsoring, you have the contact information there for Jennifer at UDI. And once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Avesdo, and of course, Ben Smith for taking the time today. And with that, we'll wish everyone a great rest of the afternoon. Thanks very much.